when he was only 26, because my grandpa had some heart problems, and so my dad had to take it over pretty young and take over. At that time, our farm had grown to 5,000 acres. So large-scale conventional agriculture. And so what I remember about growing up on a farm is the joy of farming. Waking up and looking out my bedroom window and seeing rows of sunflowers and just seeing their beautiful yellow heads staring up at the sun, and being really amazed by that. And I remember picking peaches out of our 3-acre peach field, or peach orchard. And we would sell it to our neighbors at our little peach stand right outside of our house. And so people could drive up and we would deliver them peach boxes. And just watching their faces like light up as they knew that they got to support a local family farm. Those memories really stuck with me. But I also really remember the look of really deep sadness in my dad's eyes when I was about 12 years old, and he was realizing that we were going to have to sell the farm. And he was selling off land quickly, consolidating his farming efforts, diversifying his farming too. He even had like a little bit of grapes, so vineyards, and he had orchards, and he had row crop tomatoes and bell peppers. And at that time, I was, like 13, and I was being told, you can do anything you want to do in life as long as you don't become a farmer, because of the hardship that it had really brought on my family. And so what concerns me now as I think about the future of farming is the other farm families that are facing climate impacts along with the mounting challenges of how to access land and how to deal with high interest rates and debt and keep a farm going and make a living. So I put up this slide just as an overview of some of the challenges that climate change has brought to farmers. But what gives me hope every day in the face of these challenges is that I get to work with the California Climate and Agriculture Network, where we believe in farmers as our heroes, and we work with them and understand that they are on the front lines of climate change, but we also know that they are uniquely tooled and positioned to mitigate those impacts through regenerative farming practices. They can be resilient in the face of all of these different impacts. So that gives me a lot of hope, even though there's a lot to do. And scientists tell us that we have to act now if we want to prevent the worst impacts from climate change to happen. So we have a lot to be working on right now. And at CalCan, we are constantly advocating for more funding to be invested in agriculture's climate solutions, to really see money from the government funneled down to our farms and ranches so that regenerative agriculture can be more widespread throughout the state. So tonight I'm going to be talking with you about how agriculture can be part of the climate solution, the various policies in place that are here to help our farmers and ranchers, and then how you can get involved as well. So first, CalCan started as a coalition of sustainable agriculture organizations. This is a list of all of our members in our coalition. So these are who we represent. And CalCan formed in 2009, and at that time, there really wasn't a voice for sustainable agriculture. California had just passed its first climate change goal through AB 32 to lower emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. So that's what California was aiming towards, and our executive director, Renata Brillinger, worked with our policy director, Jeannie Merrill, and they approached sustainable agriculture organizations and said, what can we do about this? How can agriculture be part of the solution, because we know that it can? And so that's a little bit about how we got started. And where are we at today? California now has 2 different targets for climate emissions. The first being reduce emissions to 40% below 1990 by 2030. and the second being become carbon neutral by 2045, as said by Governor Brown in his last year of office. He signed an executive order. And so what does that look like? How can agriculture be part of the solution? Currently, our agriculture is a total of 8% of our greenhouse gas portfolio. And so you can see that there's many other sectors. Agriculture is just one piece of this. And so in order to meet the 40% below 1990 levels, the California Air Resources Board has said that we will need to increase renewable energy by 50%. We will need to reduce petroleum usage in vehicles by 50%. We need to double our energy efficiency in our existing buildings, and we need to invest in carbon sequestration on our natural and working lands. In this past year, CalCAN joined an effort with a number of natural and working lands groups, other organizations working on climate and agriculture issues, and they have set targets for how can agriculture help to be carbon neutral by 2045. So what exactly does this look like? So we know that there are a set of practices that can store carbon in the ground for farming, and so these practices focus on building our soil organic matter. In a conventional agriculture system, farmers apply standard rates of phosphorus, nitrogen, potassium, and then they also apply rates of herbicides, and they often till, and they, like you go to a lot of conventional farms and you'll see bare ground. Regenerative agriculture is more about how can a farm look like a living system and be that ecosystem that it is, and not so much of a lab. Like I remember growing up and hearing my dad talk about, we need to prepare for harvest all year round, and so I'm going to spray in the middles of our orchards and kind of create the lab conditions so that we have our best yields and there's nothing going to be impacting our crops. But regenerative agriculture really flips that on its head and says, how can we add as much compost or mulch or really work with the system that we have to build up our nutrients so that our soil is alive and full of microbes that are going to be doing the work of feeding the ground carbon. And so let's see, sorry. So yeah, in regenerative agriculture it means building soil organic matter, feeding our microbes, and then our soil is able to better retain water. It can better filter that water, lending to better water quality and even air quality. So the set practices that you can kind of keep to, like set principles, are keep soil covered, minimize disruption, so minimize tillage, and plant or grow plants year-round. So like by growing a cover crop, you have more roots in the ground that are able to photosynthesize and feed those microbes and also store carbon. And then also at the same time, be more resilient to pest and disease pressure because you have more life within your soil that can handle different attacks from different angles. You're able to like work with it as a whole farm system. And that also lends to having a more biodiverse farm. So you can have, like by putting up owl boxes to mitigate different, like if you have mice problems or, yeah, gophers. Exactly. Yeah, I know a lot of you in the room actually have a lot more expertise on the on-farm practices. And so yeah, the more biodiversity, the more life, the more balance that we have to our ecosystem. And with water and energy, there was a study done in 2013 that showed that agriculture each year consumes enough energy to power 1.5 million homes on average. So there's a large savings that we can have just by focusing on reducing our energy usage that's associated with just moving water to our irrigated lands. We can also irrigate more efficiently. And then farmland conservation, a study was done by UC Davis in 2012 that showed that 1 acre of urban land emitted 70 times as much greenhouse gas emissions than that of 1 acre of irrigated cropland. So just by leaving farmland in as a farm is a greenhouse gas reduction strategy. And so CalPan took these principles and we said, what if we paid farmers to do this? And so we advocated for what are now called the Climate Smart Agriculture programs. These are grant programs. So there's the Sustainable Ag Lands Conservation Program through the Strategic Growth Council that provides grants for farmland protection, especially farmland that is at risk of development from rural ranchettes or urban sprawl. So really looking at how do we save that farmland as like community separators. And then the Healthy Soils Program, a grant program from CDFA, or the California Department of Food and Agriculture. And there's a list of 28 eligible practices that you can get funding for to implement on your farm that all have known greenhouse gas reduction benefits. And then the State Water Efficiency and Enhancement Program is a grant program for switching out of like irrigation pumps to go towards a solar pump instead of a diesel pump, or for drip irrigation, really looking at water use efficiency as well as renewable energy on farms. And the Alternative Manure Management Program is a program for dairy farmers to do what they call dry manure handling. So instead of pooling all the manure into one lagoon, where it's creating anaerobic conditions and releasing methane, which is 4 times as much potent compared to carbon. Doing dry manure handling, so that's like flush to scrape systems, compost bedded pack barns, increasing pasture time. All of that farmers can receive an incentive to do that because it's costly to change out your infrastructure. All of these programs are cap and trade funded. And so what that means is California is unique in that we have the only cap and trade program where big emitters are taxed, and that money then gets pulled into a fund called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And we advocate that part of that money be allocated towards agriculture, because agriculture has known greenhouse gas reduction strategies. But right now it's actually a little bit challenging because this is the last year that cap and trade will be tied to greenhouse gas reduction. And so come 2021, that funding can be opened up to be utilized for anything, basically. So we're seeing a greater, more hands in that pot, and so it's becoming harder to claim agriculture's stake. But we see some promise in the governor. Last year, during his budget announcement, he claimed that healthy soils is a passion of his. And we like to remind him of that. And so last week, he announced his budget proposal. And it's just a proposal, so we'll see how it turns out. But it included funding for the Climate Smart Agriculture programs, although less than what we would hope for, at least there is funding. And he has come out with some new strategies for how to uncouple the cap and trade with climate smart agriculture. He introduced a $4.5 billion climate bond that would go to fund resiliency efforts throughout the state. So that could look like wildfire protection strategies or improving our forests and wetlands. And we're also claiming that that money be spent on climate smart agriculture. And then he also announced a $1 billion climate catalyst fund, which is a low interest loan program that he thinks would help to, instead of just providing a grant, provide a loan to the farmers. And so we'll see what this looks like. We really don't know because it was just announced last week on Friday. So there's a lot to be worked out, a lot of details to be ironed through, but we are hopeful that we do have an advocate in the governor, and we are working with target legislators throughout the state to show agriculture's importance. And so how can you help? The first is to vote. If the climate bond passes in the legislature, it will land on the November 2020 ballot, and so to look for that. And then other ways is to support your local farmer, like Elizabeth, and get to know their farming practices and ask them about what they do on their farms. Work with your local resource conservation district. I didn't mention this, but the resource conservation districts have a carbon farm plan where they can help landowners to plan out how to sequester carbon on your own land with set NRCS practices. So here's their contact information, and yeah, so that's something if you're a landowner and are interested. And then Daily Acts also, and I think Liz, yeah. Daily Acts can help you to convert your landscape to be more water wise or plant pollinator friendly habitat. That's all.
Hey everyone. Hi. Thank you for coming out. It's always fun. Talking to different groups. Yay! Okay. I don't like standing where.
No, we have the board here. We have the controls here.
Okay. You're going to get that up a little bit. So Singing Frogs Farm, we are an 8-acre property. We've got 2.5 acres of vegetable production here in Sebastopol. And we are Ferguson and Mill Station Road. So as the crow flies from here, fly over Regal Ranch, and then behind there's a vineyard, and we are just the other side of that vineyard. So we're sort of tucked down in that Atascadero Valley bottom. We are quite cool for Sonoma County. Oh, there we are. And let's see. Yeah, I'll get that to work in a second. Yay. Those are my people, my husband Paul, and my kids Lucas and Anna. So the property is 8.5 acres. We're down in the valley bottom. Our neighbors are vineyards around us. I've actually got a video here that, let's watch this as it sort of scrolls out from Farm Central, which is the barn and the nursery area and everything, and goes down and gives you an idea. So we've been farming for 14 years. Singing Frogs Farm was there prior to us. It was a retirement project of a couple of engineers from Southern California who made it possible for us to take it on. We grow food for 120 to 150 CSA members. That's about 45% of our produce. We go year-round, every week from May through Thanksgiving, and then every other week from Thanksgiving through the end of April. Then about another 45% of our produce goes to farmers markets. We do the Sebastopol Farmers Market all year. We do the Santa Rosa Luther Burbank Farmers Market all year. We do the Occidental Farmers Market when it's in session, which is June through October. And then about 10% of our food goes to a couple of restaurants locally. We work really closely with Ramen Gaijin, as well as Hazel over in Occidental. And then we do a little bit of work through our awesome local food hub, which helps connect a lot of us farmers. So except for the food that goes to that food hub, which is only 2% of our food, 98% of our food stays within or is sold within 15 miles of our farm. And that feels really good. That's what we want to be doing. We want to be feeding you guys, because in Sonoma County, only a very small percentage of the food we eat is actually grown in our county. And what are we growing? A lot of this, which is great. Mine is great. But we need to be feeding ourselves. Luther Burbank said that this is one of the best places in the world to grow fruits and vegetables. So trying to do that here. I did want to take a step back and talk a tiny bit about soil, because I think really understanding it is important. So what is soil? Soil is 95% minerals, air, and water. And yet if you only have mineral, air, and water, you basically have sand. What's really alive is what we call soil organic matter, the last 5%, which is organisms, roots, humus, all of that. It's important for this discussion because 59% of soil organic matter is carbon. So that is our soil carbon. That is what we're talking about. And our planet is really unique because we have biology. You can go to many planets you know, well, not kicking me, you can't go, but look at other planets. For instance, like Mars, you've got chemistry on Mars. Our planet is the only planet that has biology. It's what makes us unique. It's what we live by. The soil organic matter is really important, not by the chemicals that are in there, but by the biology that's in there. So when I talk about soil organic matter, when I talk about, we'll wait for it to come back on. Soil organic matter, I'm also really talking about the biology that's in the soil. That is super important. A couple of quotes to sort of help explain. Tillage is a major practice. Maybe batteries? Can I give it to you for a second?
Yeah.
While we figure it out. Tillage is a major practice that reduces organic matter level in soil. Let me talk about how this happens. I like to be visual. So soil is made up of clumps. Aggregates is what soil scientists will call that. And so imagine this is an aggregate, and imagine you do tillage. What's tillage? It's a tractor and plow, it's a rototiller. I like this picture because it's a horse and plow. And what's happening is you're ripping through there and you're breaking down those clumps so that you have much smaller clumps, so you have nice fine soil that's nice and easy to plant into, right? Well, what you're doing is you're decreasing those clumps, so you're increasing the surface area compared to the volume, and you're bringing in oxygen. So it's like a turbocharger on an engine, or like bellows on a forge, and you're blowing off that soil organic matter. You're blowing off the carbon and literally just creating CO2 that way. Also, the nitrogen becomes nitrous oxide. You are also creating a little bit of methane through doing that. So that is one of the main reasons that we're talking about, you know, regenerative farming and farming's relationship to all of this. Thank you, Tor. Now I don't have to yell. So this is why tillage is bad, why we talk about not tilling. That is the chemical side of things. Going over to the biological side of things, notice I'm choosing USDA quotes here. They have good science. Science is science. They might not have good policy, but... tilling the soil is the equivalent of an earthquake, hurricane, tornado, and forest fire occurring simultaneously to the world of soil organisms. Simply stated, tillage is bad for soil. Go back to that aggregate that I just mentioned a minute ago. That aggregate is an ecosystem for all the biology in there, be it the bacteria, the protozoas, the fungi, go on and on and on. All that biology that we don't even really understand, we're just starting to learn. You take a tiller through there or a tractor, boom, you're just exploding it like a forest fire, like all of that, and killing that life. And that is what's sustaining us. That's what's holding the carbon in the soil. It's what's helping the plants grow, helping them be nutritious so that we have nutritious food, all of that. That's why it's important to me. Now get this. Pre-large-scale, major cultivation, the sort of agriculture that we really see in the United States today, our soil organic matter in the US was 6 to 10%. Break that down to just the carbon for you. Today, 0 to 3. As of a couple of years ago, the CDFA, California Department of Food and Ag, said that in California, our average is 1%. Now that's sad. I'm going to talk a little bit about our farm. So we've been farming on the property since 2007, and we first started out, we weren't the best farmers. We had a lot to learn. It looks pretty pathetic to me right now. We started out with a soil organic matter of about 2.4%, did a couple of years of tillage farming, figured out that wasn't working, made a lot of changes based on observation. These days, that's actually a little on the low side. We're more like 9 to 12% soil organic matter. So we've raised that back. So the old adage that it takes 100 years to build a centimeter of soil is not at all true. We can do it and we can see it. The way that we do these, I'm going back to the USDA again. These are your principles of soil management. Laura mentioned these as well, but I'm going to talk about them specifically. And this is not something from Singing Frog's Farm. This is not something that's specific to my way of growing vegetables. This is for all agriculture. I gave, Paul and I a couple years ago gave a really good talk with a guy named Gabe Brown at EcoFarm. Gabe Brown has raised his soil organics matter from 1.9 to 11% on 3,000 acres in North Dakota using grains and cattle. The presentation was so much fun because it was 0.1, disturb the soil as little as possible. This is how we do it on 3 acres of vegetable in Northern California. This is how I do it on 3,000 acres in North Dakota. The exact same principle. So people come to me with a garden bed Or, a farm from the Central Valley, and I'm like, let's go back to these principles. Disturb the soil as little as possible. I'm going to go through them one at a time because they're that important. We don't want to disturb the soil. This was an escarole plant, a chicory plant, that we just cut to harvest. Look what popped up here. The earthworms. What we're not seeing is all the much, 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 much smaller life. We don't want to take a tiller through there. We want to leave that in place, get the next crop in there. I've told you why we don't want to disturb the soil. Second one, keep living plants in the soil as often as possible. Why? This is the solution to all what we need. So here's what's happening when you're keeping green photosynthesizing plants in the ground. First off, you're photosynthesizing. Really super important. Let's go back and talk about what happens during photosynthesis. You're a green plant, you've got chlorophyll in your leaves, you've got stoma that are taking in CO2, taking off that C, releasing the O2 as oxygen for us to breathe. That carbon, it then creates into glucose, your most basic building block of life. It then resynthesizes that glucose into a myriad of different carbon-based products. More complicated sugars and carbohydrates and amino acids and proteins and fat, so forth and so on. Exudation, the next one. Here's the cool part, depending on the season, depending on the plant, depending on the stresses, between 20 and 70% of their products of products of photosynthesis, they don't use for their own growth and development, but they push out through their roots into the soil. Why do they do this? They're not trying to fight, global warming for us silly humans that have put all the greenhouse gases up there. They are trying to feed the biology in the soil for the symbiotic relationships that are going to help that plant itself. So this is the answer. It's one of many answers. This is creating humus. This is from Dr. Christy Jones, who's an amazing soil scientist from down under. This is a slide I love. This is in a petri dish. This is a little root hair. And here it is pushing out sugar. Liquid sun, carbon, what we need in our soils. Great. This summer, we had a soil scientist out and we did some soil tests with him, which was really fun. This is soil from another Atascadero Creek-based vineyard, perennial, tillage-based perennial crop with winter cover crops. This is very much what our soil was like when we first started out. This is our soil right now. We did this end of July. We started out like this, now we're there. I'm going to show you a test that we did. It's a soil aggregation test, and it's a very basic test. That biology that's in the soil is exuding, yes, to feed the biology, but also to hold together those aggregates to create their ecology so they can have a more healthy system. So you can very simply test your soil by putting it in water and seeing how well it holds together, because those super molecules are trying to hold together the aggregates so that they can hold water in between them, so they can hold air, so they can live and move around and get a hold of nutrients and waters for our plant and so forth and so on. So here's that clump of soil you just saw from our place. This was hard as a rock. It was like concrete versus this was falling apart. And yet when you put them in water, this had been sitting in there already a couple of minutes prior, it held together versus look at that. This is called a slake test. Do it with it's really interesting and obviously very easy to do. And a great way to see the biology and the soil structure in your soil. It's going to go on for another little bit and it just becomes a cloudy mess over there. We actually left these in the water for a couple of days. 48 hours later, it looked basically like that. Some of the nutrients had leached out and it made tea, but the actual soil looked just like that. Oh, there was a bubble. Great. So keeping photosynthesizing green plants in the ground as often as possible. You do not want to see bare soil. You want to be photosynthesizing. We do this while growing economic crops, 3 to 8 sequential economic crops in any one bed in a 12-month cycle. This is Sonoma County. We can be growing food right now. We were transplanting Romanesco cauliflower today. Number 3, growing as many different species of plants as practical. Now, I don't want to grow Romanesco cauliflower followed by Romanesco cauliflower followed by Romanesco cauliflower again. I want to grow many, many different things. Crop diversity is going to give us climatic resilience as well as economic resilience. You can see flowers and carrots and many, many other things in this picture here. Let's see. And sometimes what we'll do is we'll actually put 2 crops in the same place at the same time. We're getting more photosynthesizing plants in here. We're more soil coverage and everything. This is, speaking of the devil, Romanesco cauliflower, which takes up a lot of space and takes a lot of time to grow. So stick a lettuce crop in there at the same time. I'm getting 1.6 economic crops in there at the same time, whilst photosynthesizing more, keeping the soil covered, keeping the moisture in the soil, so forth and so on. Here's another example with leeks and lettuce. Here are other examples with tomatoes going in and lettuce and some chicories over there. Another way that we have recently started adding diversity, people don't usually talk about flowers, is we started doing flowers this year. And I have these 2 ladies, they both worked on our farm for a long time, and they sort of hammered me over the head, and I was so idealistic, no, we've got to feed people. And they finally convinced me we need to feed people's souls also by growing flowers. We all buy flowers. Do you know where most of those flowers come from? They come from South America. Do you know what sort of chemicals they have on them? If you think the chemicals on our food are bad, those should not be going inside your house. They should definitely not be on your dining room table right near where you are. It's pretty amazing. So we grew an additional 60 different varieties of crops that have a very different root structure this year. And I'm super excited. And next year those flowers are going to be in different beds, and we're going to be rotating those around. So that, to me, adds to diversity, and it's pretty too. Another way of adding diversity for us is perennials. Most of our crops that we're growing are annuals. Be that the lettuce or the Romanesco cauliflower or the leek or the strawberries or what. But having hedgerows, having perennials is super, super important. Obviously, they're not going to be in the same footprint, but having them nearby has untold benefits, one of which is bringing in animals. This is a very wild area right along our vineyard neighbor. So 15 feet over here are grapes growing, and another 15 feet on the other side over here we've got intensive veg production. So having a wild space, having perennials that are doing a lot of really good in terms of climatic stabilization and in terms of pest management, so we don't have to use any sprays of any sort. The 4th one is keep the soil covered all the time, ideally with green photosynthesizing plants. And now, sometimes green photosynthesizing plants. One of the ways that we do this is we spend a lot of our time building up our nursery and having very big transplants to go out, so that we are going from a green photosynthesizing plant to a green photosynthesizing plant within the matter of a couple of hours. You do tillage, that's going to be several weeks of time of bare soil, disturbing the soil, and so forth. So this is an example, let's see, of one of our fields in March. Many farms are just starting to till in March, or might still be too wet to be tilling. And we've got mulch on some of the beds, a lot of green plants on the beds. We've got grass on our roadways. We've got some plastic mulch covering the bed where we can't actively be farming and for some other weed management. But trying to keep as much of the soil covered as possible. The last one is incorporate animals. And this was the last talking point of these that Paul and I were added to our list to talk about, because most regenerative farmers would talk about mob grazing and bringing in herds of cattle, and that is so not what we're doing. And that is really exciting, and I love that. But it's not what we're doing, until I had a regenerative farmer hit me over the head, and she was like, "You were just telling me about the hedgerows and talking forever about all the animals that the hedgerows bring in, be it the birds, be it the snakes. You were talking about the biology and how you're trying to help the biology in every way possible. That is all animals." And so, do we incorporate animals? Absolutely. We don't do tillage, so we're not killing our snakes. Our snakes are doing our rodent control. This is our #1 pest here. Voles and gophers. You guys live in West County, you know about gophers. But all the other things that come with that, be it the birds, we have a lot of turtles in our fields, native ground nesting bees, all of that, and then compost. Incorporating animals. A large part of our compost comes from manure. We need that. It really helps our soil structure. So our compost is very important to us. You can see this pile. It's the end of summer where we had a first frost. There's a bunch of frozen eggplant in there. There's some brassicas. There's some manure that was put on top. Compost is very important to us, and it should be to all of us. If we can close some of the nutrient cycles in our community and have good composting, that is super important for all of us, for our greenhouse gas emissions, and also for the farmers. Because as a farmer, our job is to export nutrients off of our property every day of the year, and we need to bring those nutrients back onto our farm. So yes, we need to do good composting on our farm. You need to, good composting on people's backyards, but we also need community composting that's good. And I saw that Recology's here, and Will Bax from the former Sonoma Compost and the to-be Sonoma Renewable. I can actually see you, Will. Where are you? Oh, there you are. Is here. And that is definitely a solution. So hopefully we'll hear in question and answers how we can support that locally. Okay, so there are the principles. Mostly, life improves the capacity of an environment to sustain life. We just want to get more life out there, more diversity, and we find that our farming is better. When we're working with Mother Nature, we have positive externalities, and it works awesome. So actually, I want to show you just a quick video of how we manifest those principles. So what I have here, it's a 45-minute time lapse. So we've got 4 beds here. This is late spring, and we are going to transition those to the next crop. So what we are doing is we're cutting out that crop. We are not disturbing the soil. It's cut at the ground level. All of that matter is going to the compost pile, going to be composted. Now those beds are going to be prepared. We do have a little bit of amendments that's going on here, and then we are adding a bit of compost. It looks like a lot because of the color differential, but it's only about 1/4 to 1/2 inch. Adding the compost, and then we are directly transplanting the next set of crops. And you will actually see, oh, sorry, coffee break. Very important. You will see there's actually 2 crops in here. So we've got a wider spaced brassica, and then Mikey here is putting a lettuce, Karen here is putting a lettuce in and amongst that. So again, we're getting 1.5 crops per that time frame. So that was John, Karen, and Mikey. This video is now 3 years old, and Karen and Mikey have their own farm in Melbourne, Australia, called Mossy Willow Farm. That is astounding. I love looking at their pictures because they are exactly 6 seasons off of us, and they otherwise look very much like our farm. So, yay. So the carbon and biology from these plants here, without any soil disturbance, is going to help these plants thrive. That is what we are aiming for, going from a photosynthesizing plant to another photosynthesizing plant in a very short period of time, and growing as much food as we can. So the things that we really like to mold together: no tillage of any sort, being intensive. Being intensive is a good thing because you are on getting that older crop out, getting the next one in, not letting weeds come in. The more intensive you can be, the better it is for the system, for the biology, and so forth. And ecological, really thinking about the biology and the whole system. So this is Nina, who's worked on our farm for several years. She's one of our flower ladies. I wanted to take a little bit of a shift and turn it on its head. And we had talked about all of that for a very long time, but I'm actually going to say, Laura mentioned one of the biggest threats for farmers actually is the changing climate that we are already dealing with. And amazingly, the things that we do to increase our soil organic matter, to increase our soil health so that we can grow this way, also help us with the changing climate. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples: frosts, drought, floods, and fires. The first one being frosts. We grow year-round, and honestly, I have other farmers that we will sell next to at some of our markets that are in much, much, much warmer places. We were 35 degrees this morning, and like I told you, we were planting crops. And there are many different bacteria that actually help the plants. You get them, and they're healthy in the soil, and they help their plants make it through. So we can grow year-round. Fires. Very different. This is a picture from 2018. Let's see, there's a couple of different ways I can do with this. One of the concerns we had was, what about all that ash falling out? Like, what is that going to do to our soil? Is it going to poison our soil? I went back to Nina, who you just saw with the two huge broccoli, because she's a soil scientist and she works part-time for us and part-time for a company that does bioremediation of brown sites. I went to her, I went to some permaculturists, and after, we had the first set of fires here locally, the tub fires, and everybody was really concerned. You know what everyone came back with? Inoculate with fungi, add compost, make your soil as healthy as possible. And that's what we need to do to deal with any of these things. What are we doing to our soil anyway? So it's helping us with those troublesome times. This is a picture from this year. You can see where the fires were blowing in smoke, and sometimes it was over us and sometimes it wasn't over us, and PG&E turned off the power. That was actually the biggest problem because we weren't able to irrigate. Well, actually, let me take that one step back. The biggest problem was actually the weather that brought the Kincaid fire for us. We had 60-degree temperature shifts for 5 days. Literally, we had frost in the morning and we're 90 degrees in the afternoon. Now, I don't like that, and I have many layers I can take off. My plants really didn't like that, and we're super stressed out. And one of the things that I would have done to help them is turn on the faucet and given them a lot more irrigation than they normally would have had, and PG&E turned off the water. So those plants were super stressed, and thank God for our soil, because we did make it through. We did have some damages to the immune system of some of the plants, and they had more pest problems this winter than other years. This is my daughter and I thinking outside the box and irrigating our nursery via siphon during the power outages. And floods. We're down in the Atascadero Valley bottom, and the Atascadero Creek floods pretty much every winter, as many of you know. Green Valley Road, Grayton Road, it just backs up over them, and we haven't had one yet this year. I'm waiting for it, but this is what happens to our lowest fields. We've had other farmers in the same valley bottom who have had those floods not during the normal season, like really early one in October. They freaked out because all their plants started dying. Once the water came in and the water left, because the soil organic matter helps your soil hold water. It helps with water infiltration and so forth. It also helps hold the air. They had complete failure on all their crops because their crops were just drowning. They couldn't breathe in the soil that was saturated with the water. We had no problems. So although we can't grow down there in the winter for food safety reasons, and we have a lot of cover crops down there right now, we don't have any issue with the floodwater coming up and over them and leaving, and then the soil still just keeps going. So point being, with all three of those things, by having the healthy soil, it gives the soil, the biology, as well as the plants, the resilience to deal with the temperature fluctuation, the droughts, the floods, the smoke in the air, and the ash, all that we need to do. Shifting focus just a little bit away from us, I like talking about this a little bit. It's not necessarily regenerative agriculture, but it's talking about small farmers. Paul and I met in West Africa doing Peace Corps, and so it probably has informed what Singing Frogs Farm is quite a bit. Many people in the United States think of agriculture and think of large scale, think of 100 acres, 1,000 acres. So I like to bring it in within the global context of it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. We can feed ourselves on smaller amounts of land, and in fact we do. The global we, not necessarily the US we. So this graph here is from an organization called the ETC Group. They've got a really great report, I love it, called Who Will Feed Us? The Peasant Food Web versus the Industrialized Food Chain. And they definitely talk about, anyway, let's go through this. So the industrialized food chain, which is largely your much larger scale farms, I'm starting at the bottom, produces 30% of the world's food, versus small shareholders, 70% of the world's food. Most of the world is feeding themselves or is on small acreage, which they define as a hectare, or for us, 2 acres or less. Those large farms are using 80% of the natural resources. Now that's petroleum, that's also land, that's also money, so forth and so on. Not money, natural resources, versus 20% over here. Now, here's one, your ROI. Over here, you're getting 1.5 calories obtained for every calorie expended. Then that's largely because a lot of those calories expended are petroleum calories, right? Versus over here, 15 calories obtained for every 1 calorie expended. What makes most sense is having smaller farmers. I also love over here, 22% of these farmers are women, almost double over here. Go ladies. Varieties. We're having a problem with losing a lot of our varieties. 80,000 varieties over here versus 2.1 million varieties. So I just feel that small shareholders, they're closer to the land, they take care of the land much better than having a much larger space. On our farm, we have an adage, it's an old adage, but we like to go back to it a lot. The farmer's footstep is the best fertilizer. You know what? On 2 acres, you can have your farmer's footstep all over it. On 1,000 acres, the farmer's footstep is really, really, really tiny. And to the point that if we have a problem area, we'll increase our farmer's footstep by putting in quick crops in that area. So here's to having a large farmer footstep. Just our farm, to share the numbers, and it sort of comes back to my telling you about the farm at the very beginning. So we have 2.5 acres of fields on an 8-acre property. We're grossing, our gross revenue of our produce is about $110K per field acre per year. We have a lot of employees. In August and September, we'll have about 9 full-time equivalents. That's not including my husband and myself. Right now, it's far fewer. It's about 4. About 45% of our food goes to our CSA members, 45% to farmers markets, 8% to our restaurants and a food hub. So we're selling our food close there. This is our crew this year. So these are the people that we are supporting. Tora asked me to talk about what I think that we can do to help with regenerative farming. So first of all, I did put us singing Frogs Farm, and if you want to learn more, we have our CSA. We also have workshops that we do, and we try and share what we're doing, but also just in general outside of our farm. Support any small, local, diversified farmer, rancher, or flower farmer. I don't care if they're 100% no-till. By supporting somebody who's small and local, it's already better. And you're already not transporting it from who knows where. And if they're small, they're taking care of their land better. So go to your farmer's market, shop at your local farmer's market, support your local composter. Even if it's your bin in your back of your garden, let's keep our nutrient cycling. Grow your own food. Yes, buy my food, but even better than my food is what you grow. So if you can grow that. And then I didn't put this on there, but just to be real also, I know I said buy from your local small farmer, but just really support them also. In Sonoma County, it's rough. And I don't know a single farmer in this county that isn't subsidized some way, that doesn't have free land from somebody, that doesn't have an off-farm income working at the JC, or having a spouse that works someplace else. I'll admit, our farm is subsidized. Yes, the farm works and pays for all the employees, and I could do that too if I was willing to live with my family on $17 an hour. And I'm sorry, but living in Sonoma County, having 2 kids, wanting to, grow old, most people can't do that. And so we see most people are farming that have some sort of subsidy, or they do it until they're 30 and they have to go get a real job, or they're 40 and they have to go get a real job. So support your farmer, and when they tell you that a bunch of carrots is now $4, don't think in your head, well, I can get it at Whole Foods for, or why is it $4? Pay $5 for it. And I'm not talking about me. Like I said, I'm subsidized, but your other farmers, support them. They need it. We need farmers in our county. So thank you for having me.
Wow. Amazing, right? Yeah. Okay, now where to take this? So we're going to have some Q&A session with both Lauren and Elizabeth. And I also have Carol who's taken some notes. We're going to take some of these action items and sort of get some input from all of you. But why don't, you ready, Carol?
I'm ready.
Yeah, okay. do you guys want to sit up here, or no? You're like, need a breather? Okay, so I guess I'll open up for any questions for these two first, and then we'll sort of steer it as we can go. Would anybody?
Sure, thanks. I have a question, I guess it's for mostly Elizabeth, but either one, which is, I'm curious about the machinery that you use at the farm, and my wife June and I went up to Albion and along the Mendocino coast and visited Steve Heckeroth up there that builds electric tractors. And so we got to take a spin on an electric tractor. And just wondering what kind of machinery you use and if you've checked out electric tractors, for example.
Thank you for that question. Can you guys hear? Yeah, we just have to be louder on this one. People love tools. We do not have an electric tractor. We don't use our tractor that much. I would love to learn more about that. Our tractor is used as our compost machine. It takes compost out of the field, it turns our compost piles and brings compost back into. So you saw it really quickly in that picture there, bringing in some compost. Generally for people who are doing exactly what we're doing, we are one of the largest farms doing that. Most are a half acre, an acre and a half. And I would say many of those do not even have a tractor. Tools are fun, tools are sexy. I'm actually finding a lot of small-scale no-till farmers are turning to tools. Oh, but it's only a rake that I'm moving across the soil. Oh, it's only a tilther. Oh, it's only a paro harrow. And the less that we do to disturb our soil, the better. So really, no tools to disturb your soil. There is one that is a tool that works yourself out of a job, which is a broad fork. A broad fork is an aerator that is, you use it with your body. It's not a power tool. And the more you use it, the less you need it. To the point that we were using it, and we no longer do. And I hear that story over and over again. So mostly our tools on the farm are shovels, buckets, wheelbarrows, carts for moving around plants and bringing harvest back up. Those are our tools. Those principles of soil science, those are the true
So the
tools.
only powered machinery is the tractors?
The only powered machinery is the tractor. Yeah, and vehicles for taking things to market. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for this great presentation. So I am really curious, I can't get my head wrapped around this no-till. Like, so you cut off the head of the escarole, and then where do you put the next plant?
Right next door.
Okay, so you're just like going around it, because it all looks so nice and straight, and
It is nice and straight.
okay, it's just a little bit off to where the
It is
last
just a little bit
plant
off.
was.
Yes.
Okay,
And you will
just keep the plant in there.
So what did I talk about that photosynthesis? The roots are exuding the food for the biology. So actually the area around the roots is known as the rhizosphere, and it is the densest of the biology there. That is the last thing that we want to tear up. A, we don't want to open that soil, but B, we don't want to take that out. Even if we're putting it in the compost pile, leave it in place and just plant your next plant right next to it, even if it's 2 inches away. And by the time that plant is done, your original root, it's gone.
So what about your root vegetables? Like potatoes?
Okay, you gotta pull the carrots out.
Yeah, and potatoes, I mean, how do you find them without destroying your soil?
We don't do a lot of potatoes. We did do them one year where we barely put them in the soil. So yes, your root crops you've got to take out. Because you're gonna eat the roots. As minimal disturb the soil as little as possible.
And I imagine rotate them.
Absolutely. We actually, so like I said, we are not growing potatoes anymore. We have, but carrots, if we get an area that's a little bit firmer, we might say, hey, let's put a carrot crop there. So we use it for carrot, I don't want to call it carrot tillage, but it opens up the soil a little. We do not use, some people we use a huge fork to sort of lift them out there. We're actually pulling individual carrots. So.
Elizabeth, I'm curious, how many tons of compost do you think you use a year per acre? And over the years, have you seen that decrease or increase? And perhaps a harder question is, what amount of the organic matter do you attribute to the compost versus no-till, diversified plants, etc.?
Sure. I don't know that, I'd have to get back to you on the first one because it's changed a lot over the years, the tonnage of compost. We do produce about 50% of our own compost, but that varies, so I also don't know what there is because it's that pile over there, I'm not measuring it. So about 50% is our own compost, and then of the rest, it's a split between municipal compost that we purchase in and manure that we bring in. We, about 4 years ago, did some calculations looking at how much we have brought in and assuming that we made 50% of our own, and we came with about 25 to 30 percent of our soil organic matter increase coming from imported organic matter. Most of it is coming from the principles that we talked about there. I had one other question.
If there was, well, if you were putting on more at the beginning and less now.
Yeah. We were putting on, when we first were starting out, we were doing 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches per bed transition. At this point, about 3/4 of bed transitions are getting compost, which means 1/4 are not getting anything. And that's usually going from a quick crop to a quick crop. Taking out a bok choy and putting in a lettuce or something like that. And we these days are putting on as little compost as is possible to cover the soil, which we hope is 1/4 inch, but sometimes gets up to 1/2 inch. We're partially doing that because our soil organic matter already is high. We are also using a lot more mulch. We have so much biology, it is cycling so quickly, it's just eating through things. We have 2 fields, we're actually putting wood chips on top of it, which I normally do not recommend to farmers because it'll eat up too much of your nitrogen, but our biology is moving so fast that we're having to feed the biology in that way. Yeah, you don't need that much. And you actually, some people are like, yeah, start out, compost is so great. Start out with 3 inches of compost. You can have too much of a good thing. If you don't have the biology there to hold that compost, to hold the nutrients, compost is very nutrient rich and you can have it wash out of your soil. We've made sure that that doesn't happen by testing our water, but you can have too much of a good thing.
I saw in one of your slides it said you recommended some farming or gardening workshops. Do you have any in particular that are coming up? Or
we do. We have 3 this spring. Actually, I haven't sent it around right now, but let's. Both Laura and I actually have clipboards that are email. Do you want to send yours too? Email lists. You do not have to add your list. Mine has, if you're interested in CSA, check. If you're interested in farm tours, I'll have a couple of farm tours in the spring. Won't charge, but just like to have local people come out and see what we're doing. Check there, and I'll just put you on our local email list. And then the last one is if you're interested in workshops and things like that. You can look online, but I'll send you an email if you check that. We've got 2 in March and 1 in April. They're all-day workshops.
And just a note on the list, so like Singing Frogs Farm is going to circle through on this side, and Calcan is going to circle through on that side. You guys should be able to switch them.
Yeah, they're 2 different ones, and maybe we'll put them up here later if you need to add. So, great. Could you take one more, and then I have a question.
Okay.
So how does the nutrition from the compost get down to the roots? Is it carried down by the water, or is it sequential each year? It gets deeper and deeper?
It's not that, what's the word I want? You can't pinpoint it quite that much. Yes, some of it will go down through the water, and some of it is working as mulch and is not actually feeding that crop, but will feed the crop after. You're feeding the biology, which is then decomposing and then feeding, the roots. So it's all of that and more. I said that I had a question. So I wanted to actually mention Will Bax, who's here, because personally, I think that one thing I would like to talk about is how we can support our local composter. And I know that A couple of things are happening, and we did have Sonoma compost. We on Singing Frogs Farm loved their compost and have really felt have had much more of a hard time since they have left, and we know that you are pushing forward with a new composting facility, and I'd love to hear if you have a way that people here can get involved or be helpful to that. Okay.
Thank you for having me here. So yes, we are developing, or in the process of developing, a new compost site in Sonoma County. Let me back up a little bit. For a compost facility, I say that we have kind of like a 3-panel system. The first one is that we take organic matter out of the landfill, divert it from the landfill, and when it's in the landfill, it produces methane. Even though we capture the methane out here, probably about 50% still goes up in the atmosphere, which is 80 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So a bill passed that we need to reduce organics going to landfill by 75% by 2025. That means that we need compost facilities to deal with this here. Then the next step that we take is the composting process itself. Well, I don't know how many have been at Sonoma Compost before, but we used windrow composting in the past. It is also a quite large carbon footprint, lose a lot of diesel, a lot of emissions coming off it. We're going to go with a different design here. We're going to have anaerobic digestion, where we're going to get green energy of the food scraps that are coming in, as well as some of the yard debris. That would be approximately a 2 megawatt energy facility. The digestate from that material then is being mixed back in with your organic matter to make compost. The composting process will be an aerated static pile, where you do not turn the compost anymore, but you force the air through. You get actually more aeration in the pile. I just compared the oxygen content in a compost pile, aerated versus a window turned. In the window turn, just behind the window turner, we had only about 9 to 10% oxygen. In the aeration pile, we had about 15 just before the air kicked on, and 19 when the air is on, and ambient is 20.7. So very efficient aeration in an aerated static pile. That results in about put a bio cap on top of the compost as well to capture emissions. We do reverse aeration that also goes to a biofilter. With all that, we reduce our emissions compared to windrow composting by about 85%. In addition, we're going to put also solar, most likely on all our roof surfaces, and we've calculated that we could provide about 60% of our energy needs. All our equipment will be electric, except for the rolling stock. So then the next one is then the compost comes to the public, which would be the farmers and the backyard gardeners. And we're going to emphasize their carbon sequestration that we just talked about out here. Now, I'm going to partner with Daily Acts on promoting carbon gardening in the county, because that does 3 things. First of all, a lot of the public has they don't know about carbon farming, for instance, what carbon gardening and carbon sequestration is. A lot of people look at the climate and they're very hopeless and feel despair, and that leads to apathy. They don't do anything. We can give them actually a tool that they can do carbon sequestration in their own backyards, and that gives them hope that they actually can take action in their own lives to help the climate. But at the same time, when we do that, they now learn about carbon farming. That means if you do carbon farming and you have on your label carbon farmed, or there's a wine bottle out there that says carbon farmed, then they know that they actually are doing something positive for the climate because they understand what it is. Secondarily, during the election, when you listen to the politicians right now, all you hear about is emission reductions. That's what people talk about, emission reductions. Well, I got news. If we focus just on emission reductions, we're going to wipe ourselves off the planet a little bit slower. But we're going to disappear because the planet will not be compatible with us. We need to sequester carbon. And now we can make this an election issue where people understand what this is, and actually get people in office that will work on reducing CO2 out of the atmosphere. So, we are in the process of getting compost going out here. The problem is that wherever you're going to put a compost facility, Dan Notill is here, and he is a consultant throughout California. No matter where you're going to put a compost facility, people are opposed to having a compost facility. Everyone loves compost, but not in my backyard, right? And so the problem that we're running into right now is where we got great support from the farm community, from the environmental community, from the backyard gardeners in getting us selected to do the next composting program in Sonoma County. But now, the only people that the agency hears from is the people that are opposed to having the compost facility here. And now we get here, it's like, should we really do this here? Because we only hear that people do not want it here. They don't hear that we do need compost here. So I have a request that we get into action and actually let the agency and the board of supervisors know that we need this here, that the farm community needs it, that the backyard gardeners need it, and that the landscapers need this here. So I also have, not only sign up list, I do have in the last page here the contact information for Leslie Lucas, who is the director of the Sonoma County Waste Management Agency, with whom we are negotiating to get our contract, and an email sign up. So if you want us to send you template letters, contact information, etc., then we will get that to you. But I think that it's really important that people get to hear from us what's going on. Lastly, we have a quick conversation about what's the time frame, what's happening. It has taken us a long time to get to a contract. We lost employees. The director of the Sonoma County Waste Management Agency resigned. The director of the Laguna Treatment Plant, where we're going to locate our facility, resigned. So there was a long period of time when nothing really happened. Then we went to sign a contract, and they said, well, you cannot do that, because you cannot do an environmental impact report after we have a contract. And we goes like, well, we cannot really do an environmental impact report without a contract, because that costs you about $1 million, you know, it's like, why would I do that? So we have come up with a solution on that. That will be in place in a couple of months, we hope. Then we have to do an environmental impact report, about a year. Then you need to get all your permits. A lot of permits, that's about a year, and we have very little control over that. And then we know that construction takes about a year. So we're about 3 years out. The way I look at it, they shut us down in 2015. We're here right now. That didn't seem long ago to me. You know, it's like, so in that time frame, we're going to have a compost facility before we know. I think that's all I have to say right now.
That's awesome. I think when it closed, we had a 10-yard dump on our property that
we had a lot more than 10 yards dumped.
We're backyard gardeners, so. Yeah, does anybody feel, if you feel like you want to join on that campaign, I mean, you're passing out a clipboard, just make sure you connect with Will and
I got some cards as well.
yeah, this is really important. I want to sort of redirect sort of our dialogue for a little bit, because Sebastopol passed this climate resolution, and is there anything that we've talked about so far that we could offer them, the city, as a potential action to adopt and implement? And I just brainstormed a few things here. One is, this was as of today, supporting reinstating a local compost facility. These are some notes we're just taking. Support, educate climate victory gardens, or climate carbon backyard gardens, you mentioned that before. Preserving the Ceres garden, which is potentially being replaced by a housing project, so I gotta stay on top of that. And then encouraging farm to school efforts, which there's sort of a little bit of that going on, but doing more. Elizabeth mentioned, and you both mentioned, encouraging more purchasing from farmers markets. And then the top one I learned a little bit about was, is there something to do with grape growers? And they're apparently starting a new climate certification that's evolving and developing, and to sort of somehow get in there and shape that so it's meaningful. But those are just some. Do you have any thoughts on any of this to add as far as what we could do locally, whether it's in the city or the extended area around this area, both city-wise or education?
In terms of like farm to school efforts, I know there have been in other cities where they passed a good food purchasing program, which then would set in place like a set regulation on the school procurement process. Recruitment, wow, that's such a hard word right now. But so it basically would set, like, if the school wanted to go out and purchase food, then it would say, and it would have to come from farmers that are doing climate smart agriculture or carbon farm planning, things like that. So there's a way to set it up so that the school district would then have to follow a set of regulations. It's called the Good Food Purchasing Program.
Do you know of any in this area that are doing that?
I think the city of Oakland just worked on one. I'm not sure if it passed, but then San Diego has one and LA has one.
Because most of the school districts in this county have also passed climate resolutions as of 2 years, last 2 years, but there's still a lot to do. Passing a resolution is easy, but doing something. So how many teachers are in the audience right now? All right. So these are hopefully some ideas these are things your students can sort of chew on and look at and see and potentially implement, I think. You have another thought on any of these or other things?
I guess I'm just going to add to the top one, the work with grape growers or anyone, not specifically to grape, to develop new climate smart certification. I read yesterday that Whole Foods said that for 2020 the most sought after type of product that their customers want are regeneratively grown products. And yet I know of very few regenerative farmers that are producing at a scale that they are selling to Whole Foods. Which I hear that time and again, like, I want to buy this, but who's doing it? And there's this huge lag, and we're all very excited about it. Yes, I'm feeding 300 families locally, but not providing there. So I'm concerned about those being rigorous in a sense and supporting the farmers to make that happen. I foresee a greenwashing. I foresee regenerative becoming the new sustainable, and what does it mean? Because everybody wants it, and so if customers want it, I'm going to put it on my label and figure out how to put it on there. So I think farmers really need support and need money to make that happen, and it's a longer term thing. It's not something that Whole Foods can have this year.
No, just you mentioned also the small farmers locally have some subsidy, or have a family land or something like that. And we'll let Ryan ask this question because probably mine's less connected. But do you see anything in that regard that cities or local areas can dedicate some land, make it available?
That'd be
for
awesome.
farmers in some way?
Yeah?
Yeah?
Not for me, but I know
Just
a lot
offering it.
I know a lot of new farmers that need that. And we actually have a nonprofit that started locally, FarmLink, whose purpose is to link, and I know of a couple of instances where somebody's had an extra 4 acres and they would love it to be farmed, and they have made either leases or gifts where farmers can farm that at a reasonable rate. So
that's called FarmLink.
FarmLink, yeah. And then CAF worked on a bill last year, so the Community Alliance with Family Farmers, they worked on a bill last year to increase the number of land match programs, and so they're going to revamp that bill this year and run it again. So if you're on any CAF listservs, you should be hearing more about their legislative work throughout the year.
So I know, just to finish this thought on land, and those of you that might be sitting on a piece of land that you want to lend to a farmer, probably a good thing would be to check with FarmLink, or the city could make that more aware, people more aware of those options. Okay, so did you?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I'm gonna walk back in a second.
So just dovetailing with what you said there, Elizabeth, I'm just curious what either of you would have to say about the regenerative organic standard that's coming down. And if I remember correctly, you guys are not organic certified either, but you're far beyond that in what you do. And so just for all of us as consumers, what questions should we be asking, and how should we sort of, standardize around this to some level, or maybe a performance-based standard would be pretty sweet. And just what are your thoughts as we step forward into this?
Yes, we need certifications, and there's always problems with certification. I mean, what's happened to organic certification, where now we can have hydroponic food that's quote-unquote organic, right? And so that's why we haven't, I was courted by Regenerative Organic certification of, can we help you get organic certified so you can, have this certification? And I actually stood behind some other farmers who said we shouldn't have this, because actually a lot of the movement towards regenerative are farmers that are not organic and don't have an interest in it. And so I was working with a dairy woman, and she's like, we cannot, we need, because it's going to just close off the discussion. Gabe Brown, for instance, he's not organic, and he never will be. And there's large scapes of land that we need to, and the farmers want to move towards regenerative practices. We were actually even talking beforehand, up until recently, there were a lot of farmers I know that didn't want to talk about climate change, but talk about increasing their soil carbon, because they know that that's a good thing. I'm not really answering your question because I don't have an answer. Yes, it's good, and we need to be wary, and we need to support all farmers to do the right thing.
What are some questions that consumers might ask to sort of get at those practices that somebody's doing, right? Because, regenerative is this buzzword, and it's getting slapped on all kinds of things. And so, where are some of the key touch points that you all see?
Honestly, just talking with people. What are your practices? And not coming up, are you regenerative, but what are your practices? And know your farmer, know what they're doing. And I get that that's a hard thing. I've got farmers that I go to for, nuts and rice and whatnot, and I have much more of it in, and it can be, some people tell me it's a full-time job to know where your food is coming from, and it should be, it's sustaining us. So asking and knowing your farmer, and yeah.
I was going to encourage Lauren too, could you give a little shout out to how people can support CalCan to make sure that money keeps flowing from the state level as well? Super important.
Yeah, definitely. So the question is just how can people support CalCan? Sign up for our newsletter. We will put out more information about the bills that we're working on this year. We have one to revitalize the SWEEP program, make it more accessible to farmers and farmers of color and socially disadvantaged farmers. And so our newsletter is a great way to just stay informed. And then we have town hall events. Last year in April, I think it was, we hosted an event with Supervisor Hopkins and a few legislators, and then also farmers and ranchers who have received the grants to then talk about what are their practices and why does regenerative agriculture matter. And so, just staying up to date, I think, is the best way to support us.
I just echo that being political and helping policy is a really important thing. I'm resistant to doing it myself, but I do see the importance. So dial in with CalCan, support them as much as possible. So there's a question here.
Actually, it's not a question. I'm Angela, and I happened to go to the farming in the new normal. It was I don't know if you were there, but farmers and scholars and people from UC Davis, etc. That was in Vacaville. And I had the good fortune of bumping into a man named Ben King, who is an almond grower. He's been a farmer since his family since 1850. And he had a sense of urgency that I know I feel, and I imagine a lot of us share, which is the time is now. And what he's regenerative, doing regenerative farming, as I understand it, and his brother's a beekeeper and la-da-da-da-da. But the bottom line is, he said, this is the time now for consumer pressure to be put on, and he cited the Almond Growers Association and the Blue Diamond folks, which it happens to be a co-op, but the almonds are the biggest food product, as I understand it, in the state. And he said where the almonds go, the rest of the state will go. And so to bring pressure on them, he said even a few letters would make a difference. So I just want to, let you know that that's...
People are kind of drifting now. I said 8:30, but this is a great topic. So I just want to give an opportunity for the tablers to share just a quick tidbit about what they're doing and how you can get involved with them.
Hi, good evening. My name is Anita. I'm a waste zero specialist with Recology. And what my department does is we do the education, implementation, and outreach for the recycling and composting programs. I think recycling and composting is one of the easiest things you can do on a daily basis to help with climate change. And in most of Sonoma County, it's a free service. We come to your site, schools, community groups, businesses, provide all the information, flyers, posters, stickers, do presentations, all that type of thing, and help you be successful. Especially for the teachers, we're really trying to get these into the schools as much as possible. Please contact us. We're happy to implement that. And please just recycle and compost as much as you can. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey everybody, really wonderful to see so many familiar faces here today. I'm Liz, I'm with Daily Acts. I'm sure some of you are very